and that we want to join in with being part of God's work of transformation and reconciliation. Yet we're very aware of broken relationship, and we're aware that actually that work of transformation and reconciliation is a big task that we're invited to join in with. And whether you're someone from a different faith or of no faith, I think we'd all hold fast on this call to wanting to be part of transformation and reconciliation. If the communication has gone well today, then everyone on this call is part of a cathedral, a Christian worshipping community, a community project. We're from different denominations, but we're all here because we want to hear about the New Futures programme and explore what it might look like for us to be involved with offering people either release from prison or on release on temporary licence. You may hear that shorthand ROTL, that's what that means. We want to explore what it might mean to give people work experience or employment. This is very much an information sharing session. Some of you on this screen will have been involved in initiatives like this for some time. You'll have a lot of experience. For others, actually, you're tasting some of this for the first time. All of that is good. There'll be plenty of time for questions at the end. But I do want to emphasise, this is just a first step. We're not trying to cover everything in this session. We're trying to give you a taster. And I will say at the end that I'm not the person to send all your questions and queries to, and we will ensure we circulate the names and email addresses of the team for you to have further discussion with if you want to explore this further. I will also remind everyone at the end that if you do want to take this conversation further, it's vital that you connect with the governance structures and the safeguarding structures and processes of your denomination. That's really important, and I'll underline that again at the end. But I don't want to begin on lots of cautionary notes, because what I hope we're going to do is have our imagination stretched. We're going to have a real can-do attitude to this morning. And so we're going to begin not by all the nuts and bolts, but by introducing you to two people who are going to give you a bit of a taster. Before that, I should have said that we are going to record just the presentations. We're not going to record the Q&A. If for any reason you don't want to be seen on screen, you will be very tiny, but if you don't want to be seen on screen, do turn your camera off. But otherwise, we'll just record the presentations. But I'll ask Jason to put people on speaker view, and you also in the top right hand corner will have view. Gallery view shows everyone in little boxes. Speaker view will just show you the person who's speaking. Without more ado, I actually want to begin by introducing you to Simon Papril. I hope I've got your surname correct there, Simon. Simon is from the Canal and River Trust, a very different setting from a church or a cathedral or a community project. But actually, I hope Simon's going to help us think a little bit out of the box. And the Canal and River Trust have been working with the New Futures Network, I think, for about
You're muted.
Sorry, I'm muted. I don't know what happened there. I don't know where you lost me. Did you hear me introduce Simon? No? You did. Okay, sorry. I don't know what happened then. So I'm delighted to introduce Simon Papril from the Canal and River Trust, who have been working for 2.5 years, I think, with the New Futures Network, and have worked and employed a number of men through this scheme. So I'm delighted that Simon's going to just stretch our imaginations a bit, give us a taste. They're a very different setting from where a number of you will be, but hopefully as you hear from Simon, it will excite you and want to know more. So Simon, over to you, and I will keep an eye on timing.
Thank you very much, Your Grace. And thank you for having me here today. I would heavily caveat that 2.5 years of working with New Futures just at the start, if I may, just because of COVID has had a rather significant impact, of course, for the last 18 months. So, but we've actually been working closely with the Ministry of Justice and Her Majesty's Prison and Probation Service, new features being one part of that. I'll just run through a presentation, if I may. Hopefully that will help set the context a little bit about, well, about the trust really, and where we're coming from and where we saw the opportunity of working with Probation Service and new futures and things, if that's okay. But again, thank you very much. And it's I've not had an audience like this before. This is most unusual. A little blast from the past, though, actually, because I've had the benefit of singing in your wonderful cathedral there, Bishop, as a choir boy, leading so when I was touring cathedrals. So I may have been to some of the other cathedrals around here. I'm the National Partnership Development Manager for the Canal and River Trust. I've been with the Trust for about 7 years. My background is actually in regeneration, and basically my role has been in the past to pull projects together, pull partners together, and get funding in and deliver schemes that are of public benefit. So whether it was local government or now a local national charity. So my role, I've been in my role for about 18 months actually, as the National Partnership Development Manager, and it's a new role, and the aim is really to try and work with national partners, as the name suggests, sort of whether it's national governing bodies or executive agencies or government departments, and in this case the Ministry of Justice. It is a new area for me in terms of I've never dealt with probation before. However, there is obviously a significant synergy sort of at a national level in terms of our reach and the potential that we can have really with working together, and I'll explain that a little bit further. Probably my only link with prison and probation in the past is actually I also volunteer as a Samaritan for a number of years now, every weekend, and so I take probably a call every weekend from a prisoner. So gives me an interesting insight really into some of the issues on the inside, especially over the last 18 months when they've been maybe locked down for 23 hours a day. So it's an interesting one. So I've coming from it from obviously a strategic point of view, but also an element of thinking of those offenders that are sort of serving time as such or on probation. So I will just start with sharing my screen. Hopefully this works. I'm actually more used to Teams, so Zoom is a new thing, so it might fail me here. So have fingers crossed. See if that works.
That's it. That's perfect.
Okay. Right. Thank you. Sorry. Apologies. So yes, as I explained, I'm the National Partnership Development Manager for the third time. And yes, I just thought I'd run through, as I say, about the Canal and River Trust, and then obviously our dealings with the Ministry of Justice and HMPPS and New Futures. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the Canal and River Trust. There are many trusts around the country, canal trusts, but we used to be known as British Waterways. So we were part of the DEFRA family alongside the Environment Agency and Forestry Commission. And then about 10 years ago, we became a charity. It was part of the Bonfire of the Quangos, and but it was deemed quite appropriately that actually there was a significant heritage value to the canal network, to the waterway network, and actually it would be appropriate as a work as a national charity. So we've, as I say, coming up to 10 years now as a charity. So we're one of the largest but newest organisations, and we're playing catch up to a certain degree. So when we touch on things like volunteering, that was almost unheard of really with British Waterways. There were some aspects of it, but we're very much starting off sort of many years behind other heritage organisations and things like that. But the national reach is quite significant. So we have historic docks, we have 72 reservoirs, we've got over 2,000 miles of waterway, which we are custodians of. We've got over 2,000 listed structures, third largest amount of listed structures in the country behind the National Trust, and of course your good selves, the Church of England. So, or many of you here. We've obviously got nature conservation areas, so SSSIs, and it takes no small feat in terms of the cost to maintain that. So we get a government grant of about 50 million from DEFRA, but the other 3/4 of the funding comes from other sources and other incomes as such. So that's it. So our vision is, again, it's been quite a significant change where we became well, British Waterways was very much focused on the assets, and now we've realised as a charity we need to focus on the impact it has. So our vision is very much that living waterways transform places and enrich lives, and that's again a theme that runs right through to working with probationers and people on probation and those in prison as well. So caring for the waterways and securing the future is one of our main aims, and improving the well-being of the nation is something that is sounds a big task and a big ask, but it's something that we've realised that given our waterways, within 9 million people within a kilometre of our waterways, or 10-15 minutes, we suddenly realised actually the impact isn't about just preserving our heritage. It is very much about the impact it can have on people in these communities. A lot of these communities are very deprived, especially in the Midlands, and so actually this is their green space, their lifeline, their blue space, whatever you want to call it. And as I'll explain, through doing a lot of research, we've identified that sort of the work of or the benefit of green space and blue space is quite significant on the public well-being. So what does well-being mean? It can mean different things to different people, but of course we've got community safety, we've got physical health, emotional health, there's the well-being of the nation in terms of its heritage value, but more particularly, as I say, it is really in this context, it's very much about having a good environment as well that sets the scene for people's well-being. So in terms of this is called an outcomes measurement framework. We have a whole series of measures. One of those measures is actually involves working with the Prison and Probation Service to actually bring about, to contribute to community rehabilitation, but also to benefit the public that they are on the waterways they're working on. So I'll explain that in a little bit more detail. So as you can see here, there's no sense of well-being from that. Beauty matters. It sounds a simple and obvious statement, but as I say, when 9 million people live within 10 minutes walk of one of our waterways or watercourses, then actually the state of that watercourse is quite significant in terms of their well-being. If it's like this, then they're not going to come down. But so our focus is very much about trying to improve and enhance this environment for the well-being of all these communities alongside it. So yes, as I say, if we found out that obviously some of the barriers for people using the waterways on our network is because of the state of it, whether it could be graffiti or litter or antisocial behaviour and things like that. So as I say, particularly as I say, the visual environment is a key thing. Now, as I say, these are just highlighting some of the worst bits. There's a considerable amount of beautiful sections of waterway, so I don't want to put anyone off on that one, but it goes to show why the need is more particularly. So as I say, we've been working with many groups and organisations and volunteers in particular to improve that. Again, that's one of the changes. As I say, we've gone from an organisation that's a government organisation that barely used volunteers to one that has now clocked up nearly 780,000 volunteer hours last year. So we're, as I say, behind things like the National Trust, but it's clearly a big part of the way we're going. One, obviously there's a benefit to the waterways in terms of operationally. So to have such an extra capacity is massive and significant, but also it engenders that pride in the community. It engages people with their waterways. So in the past, maybe historically, they've maybe shied away from using their using their local canal because they've heard things about it or they don't think it's safe. But actually through organised activities and particularly cleanups and things like that, then we've actually managed to encourage far more people down to the waterways. And once they do that, they might be then regularly using it for dog walking or for jogging or for commuting to work along there. So there's all sorts of benefits from doing that. So in terms of work with the Ministry of Justice, we started about 2 years ago. We met with David Gork, who's centred in the middle there. He was the Justice Secretary at the time. And this is down at Sharpness Port, down, which is a sort of not far from actually where Bishop Rachel is in Gloucestershire, sort of around that area. And Leyhill, HMP Leyhill is actually a Gloucestershire prison as well. So we started working with New Futures in terms of providing them the opportunities to actually work on our local environment. They came down as a cohort and they've been doing that regularly, and it's been a massive difference to the area. It's been welcomed by our harbour master, our area operations manager. It's been something that has been made a huge difference to that environment, and also it gave us as an organisation the confidence that actually that we could start working with prisoners released on temporary licence. Now, as I say, the impact was also felt that the prisoners themselves actually had great comments and feedback about working outdoors. Now, obviously, that's probably even greater now, given they've been locked up for significantly more time than they would wish due to the COVID restrictions. But the same has then gone on to, we started having conversations about the probation service as such as well. Now, they used to be called CRCs, Community Rehabilitation Companies. Some of you may have worked with them in the past. There was about 21 of them around the country. A few months ago, at the beginning of summer, there was a reunification of that to become the National Probation Service. But during the last year and a half as such, we've had discussions with the Ministry of Justice, prompted by the good work that we did with David Gorkin and New Futures, as I said, introduced by New Futures, that we've actually we had discussions to see if we could roll out the work of community service, or community payback as it's called. It's called unpaid work now, or people on probation, but apart from the changing language, the principle is the same, is that obviously people do community service within their local community, and that means there's potential to work on their local waterways. And so that's been done in the past maybe on an ad hoc localized basis. Maybe a probation manager knows the supervisor of ours as such, but the fact that we've got such a national reach, the ministry wanted to see if there's a potential to work with national landowning bodies like ourselves, see if we could roll that out. And so as a result of that, we've been working closely with them to, even through the reunification earlier this year, to identify and increase activity on the waterways. So we've got areas like on the Tees Barrage and sites in Birmingham, in Sheffield, in London, in the northwest and northeast. We've got sites all over the place which are now starting to use and sort of engage with the local probation service to actually undertake improvements on the waterways. Now, although I did mention about beauty matters, and with the sort of the sense of that goes to litter picking, the reality is that actually there's all sorts of tasks which I'll come on to in a moment. So yes, the relationship is certainly strong with the Ministry of Justice, and one of the things that we wanted to do was through these discussions actually have a national agreement and a memorandum of understanding between us, so that actually it commits the probation service to undertaking a certain number of hours. Now, they've talked about up to 500,000 hours potentially of on our being applied to our network, which is a massive increase. So it'll take time to build that up and to build up their relationships and to undertake all the safeguarding and risk assessments and things like that. But once that is in place, then there is going to be the chance for regular sort of cohorts of groups coming down to the waterways, and that relationship will improve through working with the probation managers, and could make a real impact. And at the moment, as I say, we've actually this week just literally formalised that agreement, and it's due to be signed, I think, in the next week or two.
Simon, 2 more minutes.
No problem, coming to the end. So as I say, we're looking to extend that out. The work with New Futures and prisoners on release on temporary licence paused because of they just weren't able to come out through COVID. There's been far more flexibility at the moment with the probation service because people were already just doing community service. They were at home anyway. So that's the thing that we're hoping to go forward now with, is to actually continue the work with Lay Hill. We started working with HMP Spring Hill, looking at certain placements with Thorncross in the northwest and Cope Levington in the northeast as well. So we're starting to re-engage with the prisons as their prisoners released on temporary licence are allowed out, and we're doing evaluation of that work. So, and this is just a quick summary, just as I say, it's not all about litter picking. By actually quite the opposite, we try and reduce that. It's really about meaningful activity, and as you can see, you know, that applies to, it's also transferable skills as well that they might learn from doing all this work. So just a couple of slides there just of the impact it has. It takes time and effort to do that. I would like to have pictures of people smiling away, but because of certain license issues that we can't show all the people. But the feedback is that we get a lot out of it. Those on probation and release and temporary license get a lot out of it, and it's something that, again, we're at the start of a journey here, but it's a very positive one. And actually the Minister, well, it was Robert Buckland, but hopefully Dominic Raab will be joining us in 2 weeks to celebrate that and launch some of the work of unpaid work in our partnership together. So I think that's it. Am I just in time?
Thank you, Simon.
No
and
problem.
we will come to questions and things at the end. A very different context from many people here, but as I said at the beginning, and what I love about that is it does illustrate us at the beginning about relationship being about with I talked about with God, with neighbour, and with creation, and that was a lovely example of that.
Good. Thank you.
I'm absolutely delighted now, and we're going to just mute you, Simon, if you can. Brilliant, lovely. I'm delighted now to introduce Cara Arthur. And since March, Cara has been the lived experience lead in the Reducing Reoffending Directorate. And I think Cara has spent about 15 years working in the third sector across criminal justice, employing ex-offenders and substance misuse. She has an HR skill set, and she also has personal experience of the criminal justice sector. So Cara, over to you, 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'll have questions at the end. Thanks, Cara.
Thank you very much. I have to say, I felt very emotional when you were introducing, because I was writing down a couple of things that you said, and you said about us being restorative and you know, trying to obviously be very collective in our approach and make sure that we all come together as a community. And I think that that's really important. So I'm going to touch on a couple of key things in my own background to try to give an example of why that's really important. And hopefully it will link to what was just spoken about in terms of volunteering as well. So I had pretty much a normal background, and I unfortunately had childhood abuse at the age of 5 till I was 11, and I ended up going into care. I disclosed to my family when I was 13. I wasn't believed. I went into the care system, and when I went into the care system, I was very traumatized, very angry, very upset, and I ended up running away. And through running away, I met all the wrong people and did all the wrong things. But one of the things that was really significant was that there was a complete and utter fundamental breakdown in all of my key relationships. You know, so the parental figures were not there. You know, people that were supposed to protect me were not there. People who were supposed to teach me how to be a woman were not there. And those key early learning stages were completely missed by me. So when I ended up on the streets, I'd run away, I'd go to Leicester Square and Piccadilly, and, you know, I just hung around and met strange and odd people and ended up in very difficult situations, which I will leave open to your imagination. And as a consequence of some of those things, I ended up taking, you know, drugs and alcohol to try to dumb down some of the trauma that I was consistently being a part of, seeing, witnessing, and being a victim of. And naturally, what happened with that was my offending behaviour started to take hold too. I would do petty crime to begin with. And in the end, as my drug use escalated, so did my crime. And if I'm really honest, I got to a point where I remember one day looking up at the sky and going, I was brought up a strict Catholic, and looking up and going, I just don't believe there could be a God. You know, where are you? Why have you left me like this? And I think it was just after an attack by somebody. And I just ended up in this situation where, you know, I got very angry at society and very angry at people in it. And I made a conscious decision that I was going to be a horrible person. And I, you know, would go out and do things that I'm extremely not proud of. And, you know, I would do robberies and burglaries and, You know, I had no understanding really that what I was taking from people was sought by them through lots of hard work. And I, you know, ended up in prison on many occasions. And if I'm really honest, I was glad to be there. I was glad to be in prison because prison was a place that could rescue me from myself, because I was not to be trusted. I couldn't even trust my own self. It was like I had two people inside me, this crazy person who wanted to hurt everybody and steal everything and take as many drugs as she could, and put me into situations where I would have my skull cracked or my nose broken or my ribs broken or a gun pointed at my head. And then there was me trying to like stop her from killing me, because that's what it felt like. So anyway, I ended up in and out of prison for many years, on the streets for many years. And I, on my last sentence in 2002, thought to myself, my God, I surely I deserve more than this. And, you know, I had two prison officers who tried to communicate with me and help me. And I did come out of prison, and I knew spiritually something had shifted. I wasn't sure what it was, but I remember relapsing on drugs and phoning my mum and saying to her, I've got to stop using, while I was high as a kite. I've got to stop using, but I don't know how, but it's going to happen. And in a couple of months, I bumped into a friend of mine who used to be someone I used to use with. He started a drug rehab. He's also an ex-offender, still does the drug rehab stuff today. And he said, I'll help you. I'll get you into some community services. And so what then happened was people rallied around me, and I got lots of community support and lots of individuals that were willing to try to share their experience and give me an opportunity. And one of the first things I did, because I've 63 previous criminal convictions, I've been in prison 16 times, I have no GCSEs or A levels. On paper, I'm ready for the scrap heap. So I got a volunteering opportunity. And also as well, I dressed in like bandanas, baseball caps, tracksuits, trainers. Every second word was a swear word. I didn't know how to smile. I scowled at everybody. So I was very feral. So what happens was my volunteering opportunity taught me how to communicate with people. It taught me that people were okay and not everybody was going to punch me in my head, you know, and not everyone was going to steal from me or try and kidnap me, or, you know, I was in a better place. And so I started to learn. I did small courses, short courses, and then I went off and did an access to social work. Then I went and did a degree in sociology and anthropology. And I remember my degree, and my first year I got all D's, and I thought, I can't do this. I'm just not clever enough for this. And then I got a bit of support from a tutor, and the next year I got B's and C's, and in my last year I got nearly straight A's. So I got a really good degree. And then I went into, obviously, the charity sector, because I initially went into sales, but I felt really bad selling, you know, I'm very good with the gift of the gab, but I felt really bad selling printer ink cartridges to a lovely old lady that lived in Cornwall and didn't need them, but would buy them off me anyway because I was so persuasive. And it didn't sit right with my conscience anymore. I was really starting to change as a person. And I wanted to make amends to society for the terrible things that I had done. And so, you know, I started to work in the charity sector, and I spent 15 years working in the charity sector. I've worked for places like Macmillan, Marie Curie, Red Cross, World Vision, Plan UK, you know, and I've had some great opportunities working for places like Use a Voice and Working Chance, that work in the criminal justice sector. I've been a substance misuse worker, and I've really been able to be on the ground with people that have issues like me. And then I worked up into management, and then I remember getting a job with somebody else, and they forgot to ask me if I had convictions, and they gave me the job, and then afterwards went, oh, by the way, have you got convictions? And I said, I do. And then I thought to myself, oh my God, they're going to withdraw the job, and they did. And after that, I thought, I'm going to start my own business doing HR and consultancy, because I want something that belongs to me that can't be taken away. So I think my message really is that, you know, and I am somebody, I've swallowed bottles of paracetamol and wanted to die. And, you know, I've had lots of different terrible stories that we don't have time to go into today. You know, I've self-harmed and hated myself for years. But now I sit here in my house. I have a lovely job with the civil service, which is amazing, but which allows me to be part of things like this, where I can speak to people like you and I can say, you know, that girl that was that nightmare was somebody who had a whole stream of broken down relationships, and through care and one smile and a moment and a small opportunity, I've been able to transform and become a completely different person. That now, I mean, I'm really bad. Sometimes I'll be driving down the road, see someone's shopping bag split, and I'll pull up and go, do you want a lift? And they look at me like, don't ask people if they want lifts, go away. But I really am so grateful to be part of society today and be able to give back, and there is nothing that I wouldn't do to help someone else. And I've got lots of good skills, you know. And I end on this, I think people that come from the background that I have, one of the things that we pick up, which you can't learn at a university and you can't get, you know, on an induction program in a new job, is a resilience and an ability to be able to read and understand human interactions in a different way, because you are hyper vigilant, so you know when somebody wants to help and you know when to be a bit cautious. But it allows you to come into workplaces and really, I will always prove myself. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but in some ways I will almost feel like the stain of my offending will always be on me. So I want to really prove myself to people. And so I'm an amazing worker, and I know many people like me that are. So if any of you have an opportunity for anybody, whether it's volunteering or paid work, I would just absolutely say, make someone transform from where I was to where I am today, and you will have saved a life.
Cara, that is such a powerful story, and so much that I would love to engage with you on the whole female offending and all those vulnerable women as well as vulnerable men, but vulnerable, and you've given us such a personal experience, and again linked in with that importance of relationship and the importance of opportunity and being able to become the wonderful person that you are and that every individual is. If we can give people the opportunity that isn't about patronizing, but is about saying we are all, when I go into prisons, and often in women's prisons, I will always say, I am no more important than you are. We are all equal, and we have different roles and different callings. And I want you to become the person you've been created to be. And you've really given us a great taste of that, Cara. So thank you so much. So having heard those two very different stories from an organisation giving people those opportunities, and Cara's had those opportunities now working with people with all her experience and all her gifts to enable this join up to happen, I'm delighted now to introduce Duncan O'Leary, who is the Chief Executive of the New Futures Network, and also James Palmer, who is the Senior Employment Manager of the New Futures Network. I'm not sure who's going to speak first, but we're going to hear a little bit about the nuts and bolts. I'm then going to bring in Kashmir Garton, who's the faith advisor for the Probation Service, just to give us a couple of minutes, and then we'll open it up. So do begin to put your comments, questions in the chat. But Duncan and James, over to you.
Thank you, Bishop Rachel, and thank you for organising today as well. Really appreciate the chance to talk to everyone. I'm not entirely sure how to follow Cara. That was, as ever, incredibly powerful, Cara. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of zoom out for a bit and just talk to you about the bigger picture of what's going on with the prison service and people who leave it, and then zoom in a bit to the way our team works and can help. And then I'm going to pass over to James, who spent many years working in a number of different prisons, but one in particular he'll talk about is Ford Prison, which releases people on temporary license to go and do some of the placements that Simon was talking about earlier. So let's keep an eye on the time so I don't run over. So the big picture of all this is that last year the prison service released 50,000 people from year. So we often hear about the number of people in prison at any one time, but what's sometimes lost is just how many people are leaving each year because of the churn of people coming in and out each year. And the year before that, there would have been closer to 70,000 people being released. So a very large number of people coming out of prison. And we track the employment of people when they come out through the Probation Service, who works with each individual who's released. And we know that only about 1 in 10 people are employed within 6 weeks of leaving prison, and fewer than 2 in 10 are employed 6 months after leaving prison. So only a small proportion are leaving custody and going into work. And what I always do when I talk is contrast that with some of the survey evidence we have about the extent to which people were working even before they went into prison. So the surveys tell us that about a third will say they were working in the 4 weeks before they were sentenced, and around a half say they were working at some point in the 12 months before they were sentenced. So even if you just think about the people who were in employment before they went into prison, there's a big gap. Lots of people who were working before but don't end up working, at least in the first 6 months after they've come out of prison. And then, of course, there are many others you've just heard from Cara who come out of prison ready to work as well, even if they weren't immediately before they were going in. Whether that's they've dealt with issues to do with drugs, whether they've picked up new skills, whether they've repaired some of their family relationships, whatever it might be. There are lots of people who come out ready to work as well. So I guess the first point that I want to make is that it feels like there's a huge amount of wasted talent, and people who really are both capable to work and want to work, but are for one reason or another not necessarily getting those opportunities. And the difference it makes, I think the second point I always make is that giving somebody an opportunity, of course, makes a huge difference to that individual. But there's also this, Bishop Rachel talked about as being in relationship with other people. There's a ripple effect from helping one individual to all the other people that they have relationships with, whether that's their parents who've worried about them for months or possibly years while they've been in prison, whether it's their partner and their children who suddenly see somebody working and being able to contribute financially to the family as well as being a role model again. The figure that I think the Children's Commissioner came up with was that around 200,000 children a year have the experience of a child being in prison. So the impact of that parent coming out and working is really something not to forget. And then it can be good for employers as well, especially at the moment. Lots of them are wondering where their workforce is coming from, and we're having lots of conversations with employers in all sorts of sectors about whether we can help them find employees, which is great. And then we know it's good for society as well. Of course it is, that somebody has a chance to rebuild their life again. And there are all the statistics that you'd imagine about employment making a difference to people's chances of reducing reoffending. And I suppose when I talk when I use lots of statistics like this, it can feel quite abstract sometimes. So I thought it was worth at this point just reading an email that somebody sent a member of my team this week. She's called Teresa. She covers the East Midlands for us, and she emailed a man to see how he was getting on, that she'd provided an opportunity to you. And his email, it's a short email, so I'll read it to you. It said, "Hi Teresa, writing this email to say thank you for introducing me to Savannah Rags and Mo, the driving company, I think. Since the 23rd of August, I started employment with Savannah Rags, and as of today, I'm in my 3rd week of employment with them. I'm loving the job and haven't been this happy in years. Thank you for all you have done and the faith you have shown in me. The people such as yourself have given me the confidence and the hope for the future, and give me the confidence and hope for the future that it will be a lot better than the bleak existence I was facing at the time. Yours very gratefully." I won't give his name. So I guess that's just to say, although I've sat here and talked about a lot of statistics, the number of people leaving and proportions and so on, they're obviously all made up of lots of individuals and the difference that can make to people. My earphones have just gone. Can you still hear me okay? I'm just sorry about this. My earphones run out of battery. I'm going to swap. So because of all that, the New Futures Network's been set up to help, to make sure that more people get opportunities to work when they leave prison. Sorry, excuse me 1 second. So who are we? We're the specialist team in HMPPS, Her Majesty's Prison and Probation Service, and it's our job to go and work with employers in all sectors, in all parts of England and Wales. When we do work with employers, we set up 3 types of partnership, and I'll focus more on the last 2. The first is work in prisons. On a normal day when there isn't a pandemic, if that's such a thing anymore, we'd have 11,000 or so people working in prison, whether that's producing things for other prisons, making furniture, making clothes, doing all sorts of other things, or working for commercial companies who provide work as well. Lots of manufacturing, for example. That's the first type of partnership we do, which is a really important part of the regime and giving people something purposeful and, in the best cases, something developmental to do as well. The second type of partnership is one we've heard about already, which is opportunities for people to go out and work on release on temporary license. That, for those who haven't come across the term, or ROTL, we love an acronym. So release on temporary license is available to people in the last 2 years of their sentence, and it's not available to in every prison or to every prisoner, but people who've been risk assessed and normally in an open prison. And people go out and work in the community. Lots of that is paid employment. So you'll have heard of some of the household names, Greggs, the Timpson Group, and so on, some other supermarkets, lots of construction companies who take people daily. And people could go and work for up to 2 years, build up some money, build up a record with a company as well, which is really important.
Duncan, you're on mute.
Duncan, you've just gone on mute.
Sorry about that. Thank you. Yes, so people going out working on release and temporary license, leave the prison in the morning, go to work, have license conditions, as the name suggests, that they're released in order to go to work, and then they come back to prison in the evening and can work for 5 days a week for up to 2 years, earning money. And that's a great part of their readjustment and resettlement. And then there are some voluntary placements, though, which I'll come back to, and that Simon was alluding to earlier. The third type of partnership is when we just find companies and bring them in to recruit people. They have jobs, we have people leaving prison, and we help match the 2 up and work very closely with them and guide them through the process. So our overall goal is that more people go out and work and do paid work when they leave prison. But a really important part of that for lots of people are the voluntary placements that people do on release on temporary license too. If you've been in prison in particular, if you've been in for a long time, there's an adjustment period coming out. You're not necessarily, just to take a really silly example, contactless payments might not have been around when you went into prison when you went into prison. And so coming out and working in a shop, there's a whole new set of ways of doing a transaction that didn't even exist when you went in, or at least you may not have been part of. So often people, before they go on to do paid work, go and do voluntary placements, which are part of them, contributing and giving something back to society, but it's also an adjustment process for them to start doing something without necessarily having the full responsibility of a paid employee as well. So often in our open prisons, we're giving people the chance to do that before they go on and do something different over the course of their 2 years when they're able to do those work. So I suppose that's a long way of saying that what we're really after ultimately for people, like everybody, is a chance to go and work and earn a living and have a steady and rewarding job. But along the way, for many people, there's a really important step, which is going and doing a voluntary placement and getting an awful lot out of that. And as we heard from Simon, contributing through that as well. Just a final thing from me before I pass on to James is that I mentioned our team covers the whole of England and Wales. So really, we're here to be the kind of guides for employers and other organisations who want to explore working with prisons and offering opportunities a bit like the ones I've spoken to. I think often organisations have thought about this but not necessarily known how to do it or who to talk to. So that's why we're here and we've been established. We'll share some contact details at the end. We've got people who cover, as I mentioned, the whole of England and Wales, and we'll be there to take you into a prison or your colleagues, meet some of the men or the women in there, learn more about the opportunities to work with them, and then it will be your decision about whether you wanted to go ahead or not. So we'd love to talk to anybody on the call and any contacts that you might want to put in touch with us as well. So I think I'll pause there before I hog all of the time and pass over to James, who can tell you a bit more about the day-to-day aspects of this from his experience working in HMP Ford. James.
Okay, thank you. Hello all. Yeah, so I'm James Palmer, the Senior Employment Manager for New Futures Network. I've been in the prison service 20 years and worked in prisons for about 17 and a half, 18 years. A lot of that has been around helping individuals access ROTL, release on temporary licence. One of my main roles was to find the men at HMP Ford employment, paid employment, but as Duncan rightly said, an important part of ROTL is the voluntary side. And I used to do a lot, and I just thought I'd give you a flavour of some people that I used to work with voluntarily. A lot of them would be churches. I used to let lots of chaps go to work for the upkeep and manage alongside the churches in the sort of local community, which is very important actually to the local community. I've done a lot of stuff with some care homes where a lot of people might be concerned about safeguarding, and I'll come on to that in a minute, but we used to send some of our serving offenders to go and support care homes. We've done some work with schools, a veterans hospice, stroke hospital, quite a bit with the council we've done some work with. And then, as Cara mentioned earlier, there's a lot of voluntary organisations such as Sue Ryder's Scope that we've done a lot with. And ultimately, people would go out to work for normally a period of sort of 6-7 hours a day, 5 days a week, to support these voluntary organisations. And Duncan is very right, and I learned the hard way is how I expected someone that has been in prison for 10 years, and as we all know, has been in a room the size of a bathroom and hardly done anything, and I'm expecting them to go to work for 10 hours a day and do a real day's work, and then surprised they came back and said they couldn't do it. So it's a really good opportunity, a stepping stone for some of our longer termers to be able to do something in the community. We test them in the community to ensure that they can do this, and then they can move on into sort of full-time paid employment. And there's always a very big question around risk assessment, safeguarding, how the services and how the prisoner manages all of this. And I think, you know, initially it's a very much a cross-departmental, cross-agency process, and it can be a very long process. On average, someone just to work at the church next door can take up to 8 to 12 weeks for that person from saying, yes, I'd like to do it, to actually starting. And I think we are quicker now and we are better at it, but there is also an important part where we have to be slow and get it right, because we do look at all different aspects of somebody's index offence, what their risk factors are. Probably haven't got time to go for all them in the minute, but you look at what the person's, why the reasons they were in prison, that's a risk factor. And you also have a massive duty of care to ensure you're not putting that person back in that sort of position. So if somebody had some, as an example, risk factor was alcohol, the last thing I would be doing is putting them in a public house to pour pints. That's a sort of very basic example. And we would then, alongside the index offence, the risk factors, there's also victims issues and victim conversations that we have to have as well. And that all forms part of the decision making on whether somebody goes to that placement or not. And when I say cross-agency, we utilise, obviously, prisons make decisions, probation make decisions, the police make decisions. Even if it literally is 2 yards down the road, all of those people are involved in making the right decision. And without forgetting the prisoner, the prisoner has a decision to make if that's what they would like to do, if that's right. Yes, sometimes we have to be aware of what the person might want rather than what they need, and we have to discuss that with them. But ultimately, we do have a duty of care to the prisoner, that not only is it good for the community, it's good for the voluntary organisation, but it's good for the person. And we've got to make sure that we're not putting them in a risk as well. And without naming names or anything like that, but one of these sort of organisations that I spoke about earlier, we did our due diligence and we couldn't actually allow that person to go there because there was an issue with the placement and not the person. So we are fully aware, and we do make sure that all the boxes are ticked for that part of the safeguarding and the risk. There's, as I say, there's a lot around risk, and I could talk about memorandum of understandings, which I know that came up in the chat earlier. I could talk more about the probation, more about some of the decisions that are made within the prison, because we look at how well they're conforming. Are they playing a part of the regime? What are they like in prison? And that forms quite a big part of the decision making. I could go on and talk about that for ages, and that would probably come after, or through emails. And if anybody wants to do it, then we can obviously support individuals to do that, as Duncan said, with the NFN teams and brokers and myself and essentially as well.
Brilliant.
So
thanks, James, and that really good note to finish presentation on, because actually this is just a taster, and what I hope you've got a sense of is there's lots of experience here, lots of processes here, but actually what we want to do is for you to begin thinking, do I want to take this conversation further? If you want to start, if you've got questions, do start putting them in the chat. And while you're doing this, I just want to pick up again on some of the themes. I think we've heard the word purposeful used a lot, and certainly something I talk a lot about is actually it's not simply about giving people just activity. It's about purposeful activity. It's about dignity. It's about that relationship. It's about opportunity. We know from all the research and evidence that actually when people come out of prison, they need purposeful activity. They need a home, and they need that support around them if there are addiction issues, some of those vulnerabilities. We know that all those things need to come together. We've talked a lot about reducing reoffending, and we've heard a lot about that from Cara. We know people actually go through those revolving doors again and again. And how do we help people have that sense of dignity and purpose? And you might be thinking, oh, I haven't got much to offer, but there might be something in your setting, which might be something quite small, which will give that stepping stone and that relationship there. And I was pleased, Duncan, you talked about purposeful work in prison. I recently in July was visiting Featherstone and was amazed there at all the manufacturing that's going on in there for other prisons, as well as for other places, ranging from beds and cupboards to clothing to mouse mats, all sorts of things. Fantastic. And people, when they come out of prison, I think it's fair to say, Duncan, you've got more experience, sometimes find that the purposeful work they were doing in prison, actually they haven't got that when they come out of prison. And actually we want to keep on enabling that. So let's see what questions there are. If you're very familiar with the, all good, if you know how to put your yellow hand up, which you usually can find in reactions, you can try that too. But we've got two questions straight away. A question from Helen here from Chester Cathedral. What is the approach to information sharing with the local partner organisation to enable them to conduct their own local risk assessment, assessing impact on existing work? So really key question there about information sharing, and I know a few people have raised that. Just before we come to that, think about who's going to answer that. Kashmir, can I just bring you in just for a couple of minutes? Kashmir, who is the faith advisor for the Probation Service. Kashmir, you've been doing a project in the Diocese of Worcester. Do you want to just give us just a few broad brushstrokes, and then we'll pick up that question from Helen and then come back to some other questions?
Yeah, hopefully everyone can hear me.
Yes,
yep.
Fine.
Okay, brilliant. So thanks for that, Bishop Rachel. In terms of the project that I'm doing, I'm working with the Diocese of Worcester and the probation team in Worcester. And basically what we're looking at is developing a safe process for referring someone, a service user that we're working with, to a faith community, and it could be any faith community, and it just happens that we're working with the diocese on this. And in terms of making that referral for that person to attend church, it's looking at and recognizing that our faith communities are places where obviously they will be vulnerable people, you know, by virtue either of their age or because, you know, they may be having a life situation, for example, bereavement, that actually makes them vulnerable as well. But we also want to make sure that recognizing the value, the added value that churches and faith groups could bring to rehabilitation, to supporting people to maintain their faith, but also to actually build those positive relationships that Bishop Rachel talked about. It's really important for us to be able to work in partnership with those faith communities to help them to welcome those individuals. So what we would be doing as part of this pilot, as we're setting this up, is that we're developing a safe referral process whereby probation would identify someone for whom faith is important, and if they want to attend that faith community, the probation staff would liaise with the faith community safeguarding lead or SPOC person, whoever was identified, be very clear about the risks that are presented so that proper risk assessment would be undertaken. And then there would be those conversations with the church or the faith community that is willing to welcome that individual to look at, actually, can we put safeguards in place to welcome this individual? And, you know, we're looking at, for example, behaviour contracts that we put in place. So, for example, if there's particular risks to children, are there services they can attend where children, you know, aren't present? So that's as an example.
Yeah.
We're also putting in place sort of secure information sharing arrangements. But the whole purpose of this is to really support that faith community by working in partnership to welcome the individual that we know that faith communities can support.